So in this video, I challenged the listener to hear and quantify the difference in sound between two iterations of the same trumpet, the first and second generation Yamaha 8310Z. And in this one, I explored the value of leaving space during an improvised solo. I'm going to link to both in the description because this video relates to both. So I was interested but not surprised by the disparate and sometimes contradictory comments about the horn comparison. There were more votes for the second generation overall, but a significant number of people did prefer the sound of the first generation, and there were also some who heard a difference but couldn't definitively state a preference. Where someone might say that one horn had a specific tonal quality compared to the other, someone else might say exactly the opposite. Reading the comments made me want to repeat the comparison for my own interest, but also to see if that other opinions stay the same. This time around, I'm just going to do some improvising on the two horns because those are the impressions that I'm most interested in. If you commented on the previous video, let me know if your opinion does stay the same, and if you didn't, add your voice to the mix. My methodology is to record one take on each horn, but only playing on alternate 4-bar phrases. Then I stitch them together in the edit. Doing it this way has the advantage of providing a quick and direct comparison. The disadvantage is that I may play differently on a second take, which will affect the perception. One commenter posed the question as to whether and to what degree the horn influences the playing style. Another asked how much of the outcome is a function of the horn itself as opposed to the way a player may adjust their approach. In other words, is it you or is it the horn? The relationship between any musical instrument and the musician is symbiotic. I don't think that the horn itself has a great effect on my approach or even my tone quality at a given time. But if the playing characteristics of the horn are in line with what I'm striving for, well, there may be a greater sense of ease, and that can impact the approach. As an example, if a horn tends to be bright but you're going for a darker sound, well then you'll be working harder to produce that sound. And conversely, if a horn tends to have a darker sound but you're going for something brighter, well then that will feel harder. Incidentally, the same thing is true with mouthpieces, and I talked about that in this video. When I'm comparing horns, I pay a lot of attention to the sound quality in the first notes after the switch, because pretty quickly and unconsciously my body starts to adapt to the other instrument. At that point, it's more about the feel than the sound. In this particular instance, where the two horns are very similar, although there are subtle differences in the way they respond, I perceive a greater difference in the way they sound. However, that in itself could have an impact on how I play, so it could be kind of a chicken and egg situation. Does the horn have a greater impact on the player, or does the player have a greater impact on the way that a horn plays? Now let's talk about where the horn comparison intersects with the video on leaving space in your improvised lines. Now, if you want to include more space, and in the video I offer several reasons why you might, you actually have to practice leaving space. You have to practice not playing, knowing that in the heat of an actual performance, you're even more likely to overplay. So one of my suggested strategies is exactly what I'm doing here, playing a specified number of bars and then laying out for the same number of bars. Now, this is a pretty formulaic approach that would sound too predictable in a real performance, but the goal is to embed the idea that it's okay to hold your horn for a while without operating it. As a practice technique, the next step would be to vary the number of bars so that the phrases and the rests are not of equal length. In this case, the goal is to play the same amount on each horn, so the 4 bars on, 4 bars off makes sense. Now, once the two takes are spliced together, the space that I leave in one is taken up by notes from the other. So we don't hear, or I guess more precisely, we don't not hear the space that was left. But each 4-bar segment that I play is preceded and followed by a period of resting and listening, and that has some bearing on what and how I play. When the two parts are combined, I'm effectively trading fours with myself. But the difference between the recorded example and a real trading situation is that I'm not hearing the other player. So there's no real sense of me responding unless it's by fortuitous accident. It would have been possible to listen to the first take when I played the second, and that would have resulted in a more musical performance. And for an example of that, listen to this virtual collaboration with pianist Mark Eisenman, where I added my part to his, recorded separately. Now, for the purpose of the horn comparison, this would have created an unequal playing field because my approach would absolutely be different if I'm responding to what someone else had played, even though in this case, the someone else would be me. In general terms, when you're improvising a solo, each phrase should connect and lead to the next, just like sentences in a story. Now, you can still do that even when you're leaving blocks of space by keeping the musical line going on in your head, and this is harder than you may think, and then making a conscious decision about when to jump back in with your horn. As Hal Galper describes it, the goal is to hear everything, but then to play as little of it as possible. Now this speaks to the power of restraint, where you have many options as to what you could play, but you're judicious in what you do play. It's the old tenet of leaving 'em wanting more. Now, for comparison, I'll record one more take without switching horns, keeping in mind the goal of leaving space, but without sticking to a specified number of bars. Now, I know from experience that it won't wind up at a 50-50 ratio. I always play more than I rest, despite my best intentions. But I do make a conscious effort to wait a couple of beats or bars at the end of a phrase or whenever I take a breath. You could call that a pause and reflect approach, where I reflect on what I just played and also on what I'm hearing at the moment.